Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Andrew Sakowitz. This is my colleague, Evan Mosby. Today, we'll talk about ArcGIS Monitor. We work in Esri Professional Services in Redlands. We're not just developers of ArcGIS Monitor, but we're also consultants, and we're using this product for hosting solutions. The product is new, but the idea, we started working on this many years ago. Some of you might have used the previous version called System Test. For all of you who have used that and provided feedback, thank you very much. It was really good working with, in a collaborative fashion on developing that product. One thing that we're really proud of this is that it's based on real use cases. So I've been with Esri for, I think it's been 18 years, and the first good 10 of them, I was on the road all the time, visiting perhaps some of you, collecting the experience, and writing scripts, documenting findings, and then all of it kind of graduated into a tool, and then thanks to you, to a product. So we're really, really excited about that opportunity because it helps us, and I hope that it helps you, and this workshop will accelerate that process. So as far as our agenda, I think all of you probably have a sense of why we need this. We will talk about use cases, a little bit installation, what are the concepts of availability, alerts, usage, performance, and root cause analysis. We also try to give you some talking points if you already have other monitoring tools and you wonder whether there's a value to have ArcGIS Monitor in addition to other tools. So Evan will walk us through that.
Yep.
Evan?
All right. So Andrew gave us a good introduction and to the agenda. So thinking about an overview of ArcGIS Monitor, we might contemplate what motivated us to develop this. I think Andrew touched on it, and we'll look at that a little bit further on this slide here. Primarily, as we've traveled the globe and worked with many of you, there's a need out there for monitoring the entire system, the entire ArcGIS system, not just the infrastructure. Oftentimes, when we encounter monitoring systems that are out there that help us get a handle on the overall platform, those systems are focused primarily on infrastructure and not on the software, on particularly the GIS platform that lives on top of it, that merely reflects what the hardware has. And so in contemplating why would we build this, oftentimes it is infrastructure focused only. Oftentimes we, as GIS administrators, we live separately, as it were, from the IT department. And it's difficult to get those metrics out of their IT-based systems. Also, IT-based systems, IT-focused monitoring systems, they have no awareness of the ArcGIS platform. The ArcGIS platform has tons of metrics, tons of particular configuration parameters, a lot to understand. I think we all know this as we add more features and components to our infrastructure. And oftentimes, it's very difficult to understand what those are, and those systems it's completely opaque to them.
If I may just elaborate on the first bullet, the end-to-end, we really think that this is prerequisites to effective monitoring. What do I mean by this? If you had a choice of collecting specialized tools, SQL Server, Oracle, Network, VM, ArcGIS Server, application, and you just have the best of the best, but separate tools, this actually might not be the most effective, because dealing with multiple monitoring tools it will be very challenging to correlate and find the root cause analysis. So that is where ArcGIS Monitor is trying to provide you high quality, but also one tool end-to-end. And at the later, I will talk about the root cause analysis, so you will have a better understanding of why I feel so strongly about that. So if you already have monitoring tools and you're asking yourself a question, do I need another one? You need one monitoring tool that does end-to-end. If this is ArcGIS Monitor, then of course we will be thrilled for you to use that. If you have other monitoring tools end-to-end, including GIS, use those. The final thing, distinction between monitoring and diagnostic. Just because you have database-specific diagnostic tools, it doesn't mean that you don't need monitoring. The idea of monitoring is to narrow down, to point you where the problem is. From there, you would go into more in-depth analysis. So you will see in a moment the architecture that just identifying which tier is the problem, it's a very important first step.
That's true.
Evan.
The result of all of this, without end-to-end monitoring, as we work our way down our bullets here, is very practical. It ultimately manifests as low success rate when it comes to troubleshooting. As Andrew mentioned, if those metrics that are indicative of a problem or a performance issue or a capacity issue are disparate and you have to hunt and peck for that, it's very difficult to get to the root cause. It's very difficult to tie all that information together. So this ultimately like I said, it's very practical in nature. Low success rate equals low usability and low user success. So I think that's about it for there. So the other side of this is not just about gathering metrics and tying them together. It really is speaking to what our customers need. And our customers, as GIS administrators and managers, is oftentimes our management, or as well as our users. Our users depend on us to provide a solid infrastructure to build information products, mapping, capability, etc. And as such, they have some demands, and those demands oftentimes are faster resolution time. If an issue does occur, that downtime needs to be minimized as much as possible. We don't like having issues, but if they do happen, we have to deal with those quickly. Also, better performance. We are always striving to make more compelling maps, more compelling information products. Oftentimes those maps and information products, they have a lot of symbology, they have a lot of features, they're complex features, a lot of attributes, but we understand the complexities of that data, but it also needs to be quick. And so the tuning efforts that we do as administrators need to be focused. We're dealing with dozens, if not hundreds of map services. Which ones do we need to focus our time onto? This ultimately comes down to cost-benefit analysis. With a tool that allows you to harmonize and bring together all the important data to manage your system, that ultimately equals a lower cost of administration. Your time to resolve, time to target specific bits of your infrastructure is minimized with the information at your fingertips. And just to kind of recap, this ultimately culminates in end user satisfaction. If we can resolve issues quickly, if we can make sure that our infrastructure is performing quickly, then our end users are satisfied and they're free to do what they do best, which is make maps. We'll maybe just quickly, briefly run through the background of Monitor. I think Andrew had mentioned that a moment ago, but it's a relatively new product. Are we having troubles with that?
Sorry about that.
Has it been?
Oh.
All right, so it's not just us.
So you got used to, or it's still bothering you?
Gosh, all right, so we lucked out. Sorry, guys. So it's a relatively new product. It was introduced in January 2018. So we're in our second major release. It is positioned as the ubiquitous system monitoring tool for the ArcGIS platform. So as other products help you analyze data and provide location analysis, we're the reciprocal of that as a product in making sure that all of that runs smoothly and harvesting the appropriate information for you as GIS administrators to make correct decisions. The way it goes about doing this from a high level is collecting tons of very detailed information about the entire stack. This is from the hardware to the software, of course. And as such, those detailed metrics can then be flipped to provide insights and alerting and reports. So this is looking operationally and into the future as well. Ultimately, the notion here is ArcGIS Monitor is assisting to help you optimize the GIS environment. What does that monitored environment look like? This will be very familiar to all of you, but I'll try to paint a picture of where this starts to play a role. ArcGIS Enterprise is kind of where we start, of course. It's oftentimes symbolized by this icon here, but what's inside it? The very base deployment is composed of several pieces of software. That could be mini web adapters. That, of course, is a portal for ArcGIS. It could be a data store. You could have a server as well. Over time, the capability of your GIS might grow. You might add a federated GIS server, a relational database, maybe to host your business data that might be geographically enabled. You might, in turn, over time, add a geo event server, any other role or capability. That software, of course, probably has another data store that it needs to host its own data to provide that capability. So things can get really complicated. You might have desktop users that are actually editing your business data that are then shown on web maps. They might have a license manager. You might be juggling licenses. You might have to share licenses. You might not have enough licenses. You might also be globally distributed. In this case, Denver, London, and Tokyo. You might have users all over the globe. This environment might be replicated. How does Monitor fit into this sort of environment? It is installed and it looks into each of these components individually, both the hardware and the software that we have labeled here. It can also reach globally and bring all of that global data, if you have a global environment, back into a single source so you can curate and manage and help administrate your entire global GIS environment from the very small to the global. It is tailored for ArcGIS. When we talk about the installation later, we'll note that one of the core tenets that we have when we built it and we continue to maintain it is it needs to be non-invasive. If we go back to other monitoring systems, oftentimes they'll ask to install an agent on the machine that's being monitored, thereby taking up resources that could otherwise be used for the software it should be running. We take a remote approach. So everything that is monitored is remote. It's running on a separate system. It's observing from the outside in. Every core that is dedicated to ArcGIS should be dedicated to ArcGIS and creating maps and increasing throughput. We also try to keep the footprint very minimal compared to the system that it is monitoring. And we also take the approach of the monitoring system should conform to the environment. We understand that enterprise GIS is modular and it can take on many forms, and that form, that architecture, shouldn't be dictated by the monitoring solution, of course. It should conform to it. If we think about monitoring, we understand now how it fits into the environment, but what is the life cycle of monitoring? At its basic core, we begin by actually monitoring the solution. That is, of course, the detailed data gathering process that is autonomous. That data can then be moved into an analysis phase where we take action on that analysis. That analysis can take the forms of both alerts, which is more of an operational analysis. What's going on right now? What do I need to be aware of right now to keep my users satisfied? But also in reporting, in the sense of what's going to happen in the future? What do I need to be looking at in the next few months? How do we go about doing this? We start with the very smallest bits of data, and we like to categorize things and make things very simple. So we might take very, very, very detailed information from your hardware, your software, and your services, and we aggregate that up to represent the health, performance, and the usage of the system. You don't need to know necessarily all these fine-grained details about your system. We try to abstract that for you and just simply provide you this notion of health, performance, and usage. Who's a target audience for monitoring? Wow, those are some crazy colors. We begin with administrators. So we've been talking about administrators all day today. If we try to link features that are in the product with target audiences, administrators are our first group, and typically they will be looking at operational capability of the system, and that takes the form, like we mentioned a moment ago, of alerts. Andrew will talk about alerts in just a bit. We've already mentioned them. Alerts are then aggregated up in the form of root cause analysis. Andrew will talk about that a little more. It essentially is the distillation of the alert meaning across the stack, to put it quickly. Another target audience, of course, is managers. So managers being looking at the stability of the system and how it fits in a business unit, are oftentimes looking at the availability, performance, and the usage of the system. So how leveraged is the system? Are the information products that we're producing actually being used by the broader business as a whole? It's a much more high-level look into the system. And Monitor has capability to help answer manager questions in the form of availability and usage metrics. If we dive down from managers all the way down to developers, developers also have questions that Monitor can help answer. Oftentimes our developers are really stressing the system, they're building new features, they're doing cool stuff, and it's difficult for them to understand what those new features that they're coding, what impact do they have on the system. Alerts and error analysis that are available in Monitor can help them with that very quickly. They may not have access to the environment itself, but if they have access to the Monitor interface, they can at least get a sense of what's going on as they build new features. More of a recap, administrators, managers, and users. Ultimately, the notion here is improve end user satisfaction, whatever your role is in the GIS environment. If we were to take just a quick pragmatic look at what a use case might look like, I think all of us are very familiar with performance degradation. So let's just quickly jam through a quick use case and see how Monitor might be of assistance. As an administrator, you don't want to be watching the water boil, as it were, and watch the metrics tick by over time. You're busy doing other things. And so you might start your analysis, you might start your day by looking just at the dashboard. In this particular case, the dashboard is going to show us whether or not any of our collections are in trouble, so you can quickly determine whether or not anything needs to be addressed. In this case, we have one alerting. At 10.7, we introduced this root cause analysis notion, and that actually is probably the first place that you'd like to go and check. So if you see an alert going on up top, just dive right into the root cause analysis. An alert has fired. The system has already most likely determined what the root cause of that is by binning data over time. In this particular case, Andrew will go over more detail, but in this particular case, we can see that there's high CPU reported. And, well, but we don't need to take root cause analysis's word. We can immediately dive into the actual raw data itself and see those metrics reported right from the system. So in this case, we're looking at the CPU from the ArcGIS server machine as reported. It is alerting, it's very high. Let's look at the response to that. So very quickly, we can look at the response time for this particular service, and we can see that yes, indeed, the CPU is high, and indeed the response time is high too. So this is degraded performance related to high CPU utilization on the machine. The degraded response time is a culprit, as we saw back in the root cause analysis. With this raw information at your fingertips, you can now begin to start the conversation, say, with your IT department, and have raw data that can back up, say, a conversation about scaling vertically or horizontally your system. You'll never get those extra CPUs just by asking for them. You'll need data to back that up, and you'll need the cause of that reaction as well. Simple use case.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much, Evan.
Yep.
So you might wonder, what if you're not an expert? What if you're new to our ArcGIS platform? Could ArcGIS Monitor help you? And I'd like to believe that yes. I want to use this simple use case to demonstrate how this could happen potentially. So just imagine you're a novice user, you configure WebGIS, you publish your a service through Portal, and unfortunately, these points disappeared from your map. So you find yourself thinking, well, what should I do? The architecture of that is quite complicated. There are many, many pieces, so you could explore all of them, but how can ArcGIS Monitor help? So if you go to ArcGIS Monitor, as Evan mentioned, to root cause analysis, I feel like I need to owe you, again, apology for this disruption. I hope that you can bear with me. So the idea is to use simple English parsing through the words and signs in the UI that will lead you to the actionable information. So for example, anything with red, anything with the word critical, you probably should zoom in on this first. And then, over here it says service is not running. There's a word ArcGIS data store. So even if you're a novice user, you should know that one of these components is ArcGIS data store. And that's our way of saying your Windows service ArcGIS data store is not running. Therefore, that might be the root cause. And you see this is the culprit and source and victim. If you see any blue hyperlinks, so you can click on this and get more information, for example, where confirm that indeed, ArcGIS server cannot connect to the data store. It actually tells you IP of this machine. You remote desktop to this machine. Remember, you already know there is something about Windows services. So when you remote desktop to this machine, you should open the services panel, and indeed the service is not running. Okay, we tried to restart, but we're getting an error related to logging, password expire. And one of the common things is that the user running this service, if password expires and the machine is rebooted, the service will not start because of incorrect. Who could reboot your machine? Well, your IT department, when they push the patches that require rebooting, that can happen. So you fix the password, and you restart the service, and your points are here, and these are very important points because they're the golf courses. It's very important that. So I hope that you have a sense that it could be relatively easy to use ArcGIS Monitor. Very quickly about the installation. If you go to our help installation, it will give you a spec. You don't need a big machine. ArcGIS Monitor is divided into two components. It's the server with the repository and the administrator and monitoring services that we configure. So this is pretty much a web server. When we install this, you would have an empty web server. Then we start configuring counters, and these counters will start appearing on the website. There's just another step-by-step. You download the repository, you install the server, and now you log in, and you have an empty website. Then you start configuring monitoring services. So you right-click on each of these components, and you start adding counters, users, and alerts. Just to give you a sense, then from the top all the way to the registration collection, that could take you 15 minutes, maybe even less than that. But the final adding counters, they will depend how big is your environment. So if you have a few servers, that might be perhaps extra hour. If you have hundreds of servers and dozens of environments, this could take you even multiple days to configure everything. So but will be a little bit more how to go about that. It's a high-level architecture. As Evan mentioned, we install everything on a remote machine, and we monitor production system from this remote machine. If you get provisions, 4-core machine and 8 gigs of RAM, it's plenty even for large enterprise. So we don't really require a lot of resources. In some cases, you might want to split server and administrator. For example, if you should always try to do centralized, but if you have global company, maybe you have data centers all over the world, you can try to monitor from one place, from the headquarters. But what if you have security or network latency? Then you can distribute. You can put the monitoring service or the agent in your remote data centers. So that's possible. How do we go about how do we know what to configure? Well, we start with the architecture. So you need to know this is our solution. Actually, the demo site that we have, it's exactly this. And we need to make sure that we're monitoring all the components, that nothing is left out. For now, that will be on you to make sure that everything is monitored. In the new releases, we will have auto discovery. At the end of the session, Evan will talk about this. So please do not be discouraged. We are thinking about how to make your life easier. So before you start installing, you should be aware of that we have a gallery. And in the gallery, we have videos and tutorials. If you prefer to watch, it's there. Most average users, they can just click through the UI and the UI will guide you. But in some cases, the one thing that you should be aware of that the gallery has extensions. These are specialized extensions. So for example, if you have geodatabase for SQL Server or Oracle, then you would get this extension. You might have certificates. There are many extension ArcGIS optimizers. How many of you are dealing with more than 100 services in ArcGIS Server? Okay, so you could definitely take advantage of the ArcGIS Optimizer because it's a robot that will go and identify services that are not used, and it will reduce the memory and then identify those that are used, and they will increase. So just remember that these extensions are very important part of your configuration. You may ask, why didn't we just include this in a core product? The reason for that is that we go by the releases, so we go 10.7, 10.7.1, but we produce these extensions faster, and we want to make them available to you as soon as possible. So just please remember about extensions. Another source is the Geonet. We publish articles. If you go to implementation architecture, there will be a lot of articles, tools of architects, so a little bit more on tuning, a little bit more on these extensions. You should not have a hard time finding the background information on monitoring. So my attempt is to guide you on the most effective way of acquiring this information. So what are the examples of extensions? Some of you, perhaps most of you, have a license manager for your desktop, and you want to know how many licenses do we have, for example, for ArcInfo. So we give you this inventory. Okay, that's very simple, but it's getting better. For a given time, today or last week or last month, we can actually show you how many users are using your license. That might help you with negotiating ELA and budgeting. Perhaps something is overutilized or underutilized. And then we can drill further. We can actually pull the information about specific usernames, so who's using which license. That might help you understand per division and also we can have a trend analysis over time. What is the percent licenses? So if one of them reaches 100%, then of course you require more licenses. This is just example, so I don't expect. You have a question, sir? Yes, so that's the report, and also you can export this to CSV. So the question was, does it produce the report? That's the example of the report, yes. I mentioned ArcGIS Optimizer, so that will be, administrator, and you configure ArcGIS Optimizer, and it will go and manage these min and max instances for you based on the usage. So there's a config file, there's a heuristic, engine rule, and you tell ArcGIS Optimizer what would you like to do if the service is not used. By default, we will set the min instance to 0. You can change this, and then vice versa. What if the service is used? Should you set to the peak usage? So, please look into this. I encourage you because your colleagues, other users have used with really, really good results. So, happy WebGIS. What else you can ask for? I mentioned that there are a lot of extensions. The two that are very important is this EGDB Health and System Log Parser. So the Geonet, we're covering more of these articles. When you configure monitoring services, you right-click, so that's your administration. So when you add these, we offer default alerts. The alerts are very important because they will alert us about what's being exceeded. So if, for example, notice that there is response time, alert me for 3 seconds, and then response time, alert me for 30 seconds. We offer default alerts. We assume by default that any solution that takes longer than 3 seconds, that's not acceptable. But you might have applications that are very complex, and you want to be alerted at the 30 seconds. I use the example of oil and gas companies when they have a map with all wells of the entire world, and usually it takes 20 to 30 seconds to render. So please make sure that you pay attention to these alerts. You need to understand if these defaults are applicable. Then very quickly, how do we go about configuring? So there will be several categories. The first, as Evan mentioned, you remember he said at the bottom we need to monitor the infrastructure. So the infrastructure is under system. And in that case, if we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 machines, there should be 5 machines here that will monitor CPU, memory, and everything. Every monitoring tool does that. So this is not anything new. But then we have other monitoring. We monitor processes. And that really helps us because then based on this, we know if Postgres process is not running, that the data store is not running. The same databases, ArcGIS data store. So monitoring the process is very important. Just really quickly, that's the administrator view. Once we configure this, that's administrator view. Then this is the server view. This is the website. So just really quickly, when it comes to ArcGIS, so we have ArcGIS and hosting server. So we add these ArcGIS server to the administrator. And then after that, we monitor all these counters. Again, it gets kind of busy, but if you remember, almost everything that we do will have what? Health, performance, and usage. And then based on usage and naming, you can figure out whether it's a health. So the same web. When you have web application, we want to simulate the heartbeat and monitor. There are a lot of counters here, not just response time, but content length. Many of you know that our software will return 200 even though the map is not there. So we have to have other means of detecting that the request actually failed. But if you use standard monitoring tool, they will only look at for code, and it says if it's 200, that means it's healthy. We need to have a little bit more. So that's the benefit of ArcGIS Monitor and us as developers, because we know all these idiosyncrasies of our platform. So there are find string not. What it means, you might say, if I get the JSON, and it's a well-formatted JSON with a lot of attributes, and one of these attributes has error, and we search for the string, then we'll say the whole request is invalid. I would love to dive into specifics, but this is introduction, so I hope that you have a sense. Alerts are very important because based on this, we can take actions. So there are, in addition to alerts, critical and warning, there are details. You can click on it, get more information. These alerts are foundation of the availability. Availability is not the uptime. And most of you think that it's the uptime. It's, that's the formula, and we can define this downtime as a very composite. So the downtime could be combination of either bad performance or something is not running or other conditions. So it's not just hardware uptime, it's the availability of your solution, and you can build the definition of that. And if you configure critical alerts, then we will give you one index, one number of availability, and if you're a manager, you can do the analysis, previous month versus current month. So it's very important that we strive to simplify the usage of ArcGIS Monitor monitoring tools. And the availability is one thing. Remember, behind this one number might be dozens of alerts. So you're, as a manager, you don't have time to analyze every tree in the forest. You just want to see the forest from the trees. ArcGIS Monitor can be used effectively even if your system is healthy and you have no reason to believe that there will be problems. But wouldn't we want to know which services are popular, which hardware is underutilized, who is using our system? So this is the category of the usage. Usage is always done at multiple tiers. So when we talk about usage, we need to be specific. Is it at the web tier? Is it at the portal, ArcGIS server, or data store? The two typical and most effective places is at the web tier or load balancer or the ArcGIS server. The web tier is helpful because it really gives us the user experience. So the response time measured at this level is what users typically see. But if you want to have the breakdown per service, then we would go into that level. So really quickly, let me just check how I'm doing. The usage is transactions per second, per hour. So we are at the load balancer. All we want to know is what is the overall transactions per hour. That gives us a sense of the user load. It doesn't answer questions on specific services. We would go to the next one at the ArcGIS server. Another thing is we can geolocate these IPs and tell you where these users are located. That would be super helpful if you have a publicly facing application and you want to know where the users are hitting your website. So for marketing. Then another view is the trend analysis. So the IPs can simulate users. That's an example of low usage, so only one user and zero. Now we're going into ArcGIS. So when we get to ArcGIS, it's the same thing. Always remember, there's a health, performance, and usage. So here is the usage, but this time is broken down by individual services. So it is very helpful in case you're hosting these services. We always provide a tabular, so there will be charts, tables, maps. The next category is performance. Again, health, usage, performance. What is performance? The units will always be in seconds in ArcGIS Monitor. Others might be milliseconds. So you see that there is a spike. The next thing what you should do is determine what is the impact of the spike. Most systems, if not all systems, will have some sort of temporary spike. So please do not be discouraged. But the question that we need to ask ourselves is, what is the impact of that? And the first to quantify this, what is the width of the spike? How long was the spike? So you can look at through the times, or we know that we're collecting every 5 minutes. There are 3 dots. So this was running for 15 minutes. So you have a problem for 15 minutes. But it would be good, to look at this statistic here is how many users were on the system during this time. Also, how many transactions were processed. So just having a spike is not enough for us to quantify the impact. This was at the web tier. Of course, we have the same thing at an ArcGIS server performance for each services. And tabular format. And we're moving to the root cause analysis. I think I'm doing well. I think we're doing well.
You have a high pace.
Yes. Okay, so what is root cause analysis? Why is it helpful for us? If this is your environment and the data store is down, if we had the root cause analysis, we would just go directly to this data store and we troubleshoot. Without that, we would get alerts for everything. So then you would have to validate every alert and do your own kind of analysis to figure out that it's just data store. It will save you time. It will point you in the right direction. There are 2 UI will provide you source and impact. So source and impact. But you might say, okay, I really want something very quick. Just give me all the sources. So these are all the things that you need to fix. And if you fix, you click on impacts, and all these things should go away. So I hope that you have a sense of, look at how many alerts we have, that it's actually not productive to analyze, because this is the source. You need to fix that to make this go away. I sincerely hope that your environment will never look as bad as mine, because I worked very, very, very hard to come up with a case every hour to break something on the environment. So if you go to our demo, ArcGIS Monitor, .esri.com, please do not conclude that that's the stability of Esri platform. No. Every hour there will something broken. And I will walk you through typical cases. So for example, at some hour I will apply extra load to the system to break that. So too many users, too many services, you get a sense of what it is. Bad performance. Sometimes performance is so severe that it will be perceived as stability. When is the case? Most tiers have timeouts. ArcGIS server, 60 seconds. Maybe web server has 2 minutes. So if performance became so severe that things will start timing out, you will not know that it's a performance problem. You will say, system is down, and it's actually not down. A performance needs to be fixed. How do we detect extra user load? Well, again, it goes back to the alert. So for example, if you know that your system is designed for 10 transactions per second, and if it's greater than that, the root cause analysis will say like, hey, you're overheating. You're running more load on the system. That the next thing is the bottleneck. Again, if these gateways are misconfigured, for example, min-max instances or connection pool, you will have a bottleneck. Here's the case of free instances 0, All we need to do is just increase number of instances on the service. So how about unstable infrastructure? What do I mean by this? Restarting. So IT might be restarting a servers, or if you have arrangement that different vendor, different division is in charge of database, and they bounce the database, and you have 100 services, you know what will happen to the ArcGIS server. It will try to repair these connections, and this repair is resource intensive, and it will work and it will doesn't work. So we want to quickly detect that. How about a virus scan? You know, we've seen many security agents on the service that will just temporarily chew up all the resources. Most of you, I mean, those of you who saw the plenary, you know, that's what Julia demoed. Yes, the antivirus, you know, used the CPU, and a CPU damaged the degraded performance. So we can quickly detect that. Simple things like service stop, like in my simple use case, would be good to quickly understand that. And I will go on and on with these simple cases, but I hope that you have a sense is that many of these cases, most of them are actually simple, intuitive. So that's not like the challenge is understanding what it is, but they could be so many tiers, so many servers, so many permutations that having a tool that quickly zooms in on the problem, in our case, it proved to be effective. Why do I say that? Because we actually using this for managed services. I run this program, so we host solutions for customers, and we have over 100 customers, 800 servers. So we rely on that. Without that, it will be virtually impossible for us to be effective in faster resolution. You remember when Evan said, we need faster resolution. That's the key. We quickly need to know. Simple things like machine rebooted. Believe it or not, I was at the customer side, and they said, hey, look at this, ArcGIS server crashed again. So when I started poking around a little bit, I determined, well, actually the machine was rebooted. So if we had ArcGIS Monitor, I wouldn't have 10 uncomfortable minutes looking at the GIS administrator and feeling like there was an ArcGIS server problem. What else? Database not running. So many of you have this databases managed by others, and again, ArcGIS server will try to repair these connections. So if database is bounced and you have many services, it will take several minutes of repairing, and during that time, something will work, something will be sluggish, other things will not work. You want to know, you want to have this information, so you are not just receiving a phone call from users that system is not working. So before I pass it on to Evan, I want to say that one of the hardest, the most challenging cases is to catch things that are not reproducible. And if you have what I call these GIS Ghost coming and going, it virtually is not possible for us to fix it without monitoring tools. So we turn on monitoring tools and we catch them, and we just try to understand what is the correlation. If you have a reproducible case, and perhaps you already know that it's a database, then you need to move on to a next level of diagnostic. In that case, monitoring tools are not that critical. But finding the root cause, knowing that it's the database problem, or maybe the database is a victim of not optimal application, that's where ArcGIS Monitor will help you. So just a quick summary of features in 10.7 and then roadmap.
Indeed. Many of the features that are listed here were introduced at 10.7. So if anyone out there is a veteran from the system monitor days before this became a product, a lot of the discrete metrics are now being brought together in the form of the root cause analysis that Andrew talked about, the dashboard homepage that was introduced this year. Something that didn't quite get mentioned in this discussion, but is much more developer focused, and I'll talk about for just a moment, is we are beginning to expose a lot of the information that is being collected and aggregated as a REST API. So a lot of us, we like to develop our own scripts. We like to have our own systems that react to things. Alerts and availability are being made available at 10.7 via REST API. So you can consume that information through a Python script or through any sort of scripting language that is useful to you, and then act on those. As is typical with any release, ArcGIS Monitor, being part of the enterprise ecosystem, needs to adjust. So when a new feature, when new underlying adjustments are made to, say, ArcGIS Server and Portal, we have to react to those as a monitoring product. So many of those default alerts that Andrew mentioned up front, you'll see those be more fine-tuned if you're moving from 10.6 to 10.7. Additionally, health and utilization reports. So at 10.6, we've gathered a lot of data, but moving into 10.7, we're beginning to look at more ways of aggregating that data and bringing it to life for you. And something that I think Andrew had mentioned throughout this presentation is some of those reports. These take the form of high-level alerts, or I'm sorry, high-level reports, as well as super detailed reports that you can export into Excel or CSV. And additional metrics. So at 10.7, we also introduced AWS Metrics. If you're running in the Amazon cloud, we can hook into your account and pull very similar metrics that you saw throughout this presentation from Amazon. So both on-premise and in the cloud, and we'll look to incorporate other cloud providers in the future. Let's maybe look at 2020. So if we're looking at whatever version is after 10.7. Today we're gathering a lot of metrics. I think I mentioned that just a moment ago. But we're beginning to look at how we can make the experience much more simplified, much quicker, and much more apparent to GIS administrators like ourselves. Andrew mentioned this earlier, this notion of auto-discovery. So today, if you have a very, very large environment, it can take some time to first catalog your entire environment and then go through the mechanism of actually clicking and configuring everything, registering every piece of your environment. It's very easy to miss something. What we're exploring now and we're developing to release next year is this notion of auto-discovery, which is if you have, say, as an example, traditional quintessential enterprise GIS, you might have a portal and a connected server, et cetera. If you register your portal, we will find everything that's connected to that portal. And we'll begin to drill down even further. So a portal might have a host, it might have a federated server, it might have map services, it might have web maps, it might have applications, it might have a database. All of that is discoverable today. We're just going to tie it all together for you. So essentially what it will come down to as administrators is to get Monitor off the ground is to just register your portal with Monitor and it'll find everything connected to it. From your applications that are living in Portal all the way down to the actual tables that are living in your database, and tie those all together as well. We're also looking at ways to help expose data. We understand that Monitor really isn't a dashboarding system, but everyone, this area requires dashboarding to a degree. There's tons of metrics that are collected, and we all have our own perspective and needs to look inside that system. And so rather than building another dashboarding system, we're looking at ways to get that data out so you can create and craft your own. In this case, we're creating we're duplicating the entire REST API that's applicable to Monitor. So anything today that consumes an ArcGIS REST API, for instance, Operations Dashboard, Insights, the JavaScript API, Web App Builder, all the data that's being collected in Monitor today will be exposed through that API, and you can leverage it however you wish. If you want to make a really awesome operations dashboard about your system, that will be totally doable in the next release. Beyond that, we're also looking at webhook technology, very similar to Portal. So as actions, as events, as alerts fire within your system that are captured by Monitor, you may want to pump those out and into a ticketing system like ServiceNow, or you might want to act on them with Microsoft Flow or Lambda. I think we saw, if any of us watched the Developer Summit information earlier this year, we saw some great demos about webhooks and what you can use for them. We're looking to expose webhooks on alerts and other actions at 10.7. I'm sorry, 10.8. And then intentionally no graphic is here, but we are looking to modernize the UI. There's so much information, it takes a lot to understand. How do we make this quick? How do we make it easier to navigate? How do we bring information that is relevant in the context of what you're looking at quickly and effectively? And so we're going through an entire redesign process in the UI. And so hopefully what we produce next year will be more on target and more quick. It'll be just a faster experience and a better experience for you guys. I guess that's a summary.
Yes, please do us a favor and provide the feedback. It's very important for us. We still have some time for questions that the entire group might be interested. After that, we'll stay for a few minutes here, and then we'll be walking to ArcGIS Monitor Showcase, which will be until 4 o'clock. So I hope every question we answer. Sorry?
Yes, I just want to know if the monitor version has to match your other components version.
The question was, does monitor need to match other ArcGIS components? No, it does not.
We're good through 10.1. If you're running 10.1 or higher, we're compatible.
Right.
Yes.
Sure. So the question is, if I have multiple environments, say a dev test and production environment or something like that, 3 environments or more that are logically separated, where would I place ArcGIS Monitor? One approach that I can recommend is, I think Andrew had mentioned, there are two major components to the monitor software. One is essentially the collector, and the other is the monitor server. In your particular case, you might have one monitor server sitting outside of all those environments and place multiple collectors inside each. So dev, test, and prod. So you might have 3 looking into each of those environments, all feeding data back to a single monitor, which would allow you then to essentially oversee all those environments in one location. Does that make sense?
Where would that monitor be?
On a dedicated server somewhere from one place, and from that you can monitor all your infrastructure, provided that you have access and security. What Evan says, what if you have a firewall between
Dev and production.
Then you know, in that case, you need to go to the closer to.
So
Yeah, exactly.
the approach that I described would fit your situation perfectly then. Yep.
So you could, technically you can have a server in the cloud, and then what I'm saying is that there could be complete firewall. Very well. Any other questions? Okay.
Would that have a place on each server?
No. So.
Okay, I can repeat it. The question is, does the collector need to be installed on every server that's monitoring? The answer is no. The notion here is a collector is a remote agent, essentially. It's remotely collecting information across multiple machines. So we don't recommend you install the collector on any machine that is actually, like, say, in production.
But the idea of distributed, just think if you're part of an international company, the headquarters in the U.S., but then you have other data centers all over the world. You could monitor everything from the U.S., and it has worked in many customers. Others, we need to go to their data center and put a part of the ArcGIS Monitor in one place to monitor all others' machines, but we never install anything on a production system.
When you configure the collector, your server, do you need to have a server admin
I'll bring the slide.
If you have a collector, do you need to have an ArcGIS server admin credential in order to configure?
So if we talk about permissions, sorry, to repeat the question, if I can paraphrase, the question is what sort of permissions do I need to collect information, specifically in ArcGIS server? Or portal, or yes. So the way ArcGIS Monitor goes about collecting information from the ArcGIS platform is to access the admin endpoint. So in that case, you would, in all those cases, the software collection occurs through the admin. You would need admin privs, however that is. That could be primary site admin. It could be just an admin user that if you've disabled PSA.
So in that case, if we monitor Windows servers, the ArcGIS Monitor runs Windows service as a user. And if this user is member of the admin on this server, then we will be able to connect. Then for Linux, we need SSH. For ArcGIS server or geodatabase, we need to have credentials. So in some cases, we need to store credentials. In others, just Active Directory. Yes, sir.
Will Monitor monitor a non-GIS database?
Absolutely, yes. The way to do it is, you see, we establish ODBC connection, and then you write your own queries. Also, the geodatabase extension that I mentioned collects a lot of information, just generic SQL Server and Oracle database like buffer hit ratio. But on top of it does geodatabase specific, so if you have versioning. So even if the database is not, doesn't have a GIS component, you could use it. Yep.
For the administrator for the monitor, is there just say I only want this admin to only look at database, this admin only look at, is it divided?
So if I understand you're asking, can I just look at the database and ArcGIS server separately?
I want to separate the role of the admin. Can you do that? Or as long as you are admin, you can look at all the data that monitor collect. Can I separate the DBA and you only look at the database?
The alerts, the alerts can be configured this, but what you're proposing is something that I say, let's not do that. Because you want to have end-to-end. So you as a GIS administrator, you want to see all of them. And then if you determine that it's the database, you go to your DBA and say, DBA, please use your detailed diagnostic tools to do that. Otherwise, you will end up in a case that it's a history of my consulting. When I go to customer site and I meet the manager, I meet the DBA network at the round table, and we go around the table and we say, do you see anything on the network? No. Database? No. Disk?
No
No.
one sees anything.
I mean, yes.
Because my scenario is not really like that. Is that you have different section or different department, they have their own set of GIS infrastructure. So other departments don't want their set to be exposed to something with one monitor to do all that.
Well, you can break the collections for specific business units. So you would not just monitor your entire enterprise. You would have, let's say that you're part of the energy company and you have gas and electric. You definitely want to have separate collection for gas and separate for electric. And inside of electric, there would be production and training. So you absolutely want to break this down into solution. So if you have 10 separate solutions with dedicated infrastructure, you want to create what we call collections. So it's just like folders of monitoring, because you want to evaluate one solution at a time, not just all of them together. Otherwise, the root cause analysis would be impossible.
So would do I install multiple monitors?
No, you install one monitor, but inside of that, you can partition that by creating like folders,
We call them collections,
Yes.
but they're essentially logical groupings of data.
Okay, then if that's the case, if different, if I'm the gas company's monitor, I can only look at that.
That's right, yes.
I can assign that.
Yes.
A byproduct of that is, to your point, a separate user can be assigned to that collection and only observe that collection. So if you have gas users, electric users, you can partition these. But to Andrew's point, those logical groupings need to be full stack. Otherwise, analysis can't occur. But oftentimes they are, right? Between gas and electric, you don't share, just to use this example.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you configure and execute performance tests?
Can you configure and execute performance test? Technically, yes, because ArcGIS Monitor has a task framework, so you can write anything and you execute. There, in the extension, there's I don't know if we exposed this. System test has an extension that you can execute, but I wonder why would you do this? You just want to periodically have a stress test on your system?
Yeah, usually that happens when you implement something.
So what I would recommend is, the answer is yes. I don't know how well it's documented, but we have another tool for performance testing, load testing. So what I would recommend that you schedule this using schedule task and then have monitor and see it. You could leverage ArcGIS Monitor task framework as an execution, but it's really not designed. It's a separate thing.
There is a notion of conducting periodic workflows. I think we have this HAR file support, but it's not, if you're getting at, let's say, simulating a traditional stress test where you're increasing the amount of load over time and measuring and wishing to understand the response of the system as you increase load, I would say no. Yeah. That's kind of outside of monitors although, as Andrew mentioned, system test for web, which is another one of the utilities that our group produces, totally can do that. And Monitor can observe those results, for sure.
So if you come to our showcase, ArcGIS Monitor, our colleague Carolyn Lopez sits next to us in the performance, and then we can walk you through. But I want to repeat, thank you, Evan, for ArcGIS Monitor has one of these extensions that we call HAR, which is you can record the traffic from your application and you can play back with ArcGIS Monitor, but only for one user. But if you say, hey, I actually want to simulate 10 users, then you need to go to this tool. Right. Be very careful with these ideas because you might be top user of your system,
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Yes.
The MongoDB, does it come with during installation? Did you install that, or is it add-on?
So MongoDB, all you need to do is just download the software, and you don't have to do anything. The reason that it's not included because there's some gray area about the license. Otherwise, we would make it like a black box. So you don't need to worry about knowing or managing any of that. We will handle for you. You just point where did you download, and we will configure everything else. Yes, sir.
When would you put the Mongo on a separate server from the rest of Mongo?
You would do it if you're a MongoDB shop and you have Mongo servers, and you're like, I already have it, so you could do it. You would do it if you want to have highly available environment and leverage Mongo cluster. If you are doing something so huge that you need to separate tiers, but other than that, believe me, one small server should be enough for you to monitor large enterprise. Thank you.
Licensing and cost.
Licensing and cost. So Of course, like with every software, licensing, it's in the US and international. There are two different things. First thing you should know about, it's based only on ArcGIS server cores. So if you have one ArcGIS server and hundreds of other databases and application, and maybe not GIS, you can monitor the rest of it, at no cost. And then licenses based on number of ArcGIS server. And first course, there's a fee, and then additional, there's substantial discount. So talk to your account manager about how to do it. There are ELAs, there are ways of making this affordable. Okay. Any other questions? Is it part of Enterprise? The product and the license, it is not. So if you buy Enterprise, like Portal and ArcGIS Server, it doesn't come with that. You need to have an additional license. But it's part of the Enterprise in the sense that, well, it monitors the Enterprise. So,
And that you'll find our documentation on our Enterprise too. So
yes.
Yeah, in that sense, yes.
Fair.
Yep.
Very well. Well, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.